So one of the big news events of last week, Bryan Weedeye, was EA's official announcements of the creation of a new eSports division headed up by Peter Moore, a longtime video game executive, moving from one executive position at EA to another. And this brought to mind a couple things. Number one, right off the bat, good idea, right? I mean, it's obvious eSports, whether
necessary, practically necessary at this point.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. It's wildly popular in several ways. So obviously the League of Legends and the Dota 2s and the Counter-Strike Go's have, massive multi-million, person followings and big money flowing into it. And by the way, we have a really interesting interview this week coming up with Rod Breslau, who's very well known in the esports universe. Look for that on Hit the Pass Radio a little later on this week. We went for quite a while, talked about a lot of good stuff. So that's one thing. It's like it's obvious. But then I got to thinking about a couple other things too. I think one of the things that this means is that we won't see, at least for the foreseeable future, we won't see an EA Sports game come out without a mode that is specifically dedicated to esports, like explicitly. You know what I mean? Like now that they're fully in with esports, that's why, Matt Marcoux on the Madden team at EA, said draft champions ranked is for esports, right? And they're starting their competition. But I think starting as soon as we know with the next UFC, which comes out this spring, and certainly directly embedded in NHL and FIFA and Madden, will be not just, a mode, but also, I got to believe, an infrastructure for esports, ways to participate in competitions that are tracked and ranked explicitly for it, like they're starting off with the Madden Challenge. And there's a couple of things that really dawned on me. Number one, again, it's obvious when the Valves with Dota 2 of the world and the Riots with League of Legends of the world make so much money by owning in various aspects a lot of parts of the puzzle of esports. It makes a lot of sense for Electronic Arts to do the same thing. For years they had sort of a partnership with Virgin Gaming, years before they had their own thing. But they clearly, right, these are very smart people, recognize the revenue opportunities. And that also got me thinking that they maybe one of the reasons, not only now is not the time, not only just because it's so obvious looking at, the League of Legends World Championships and the international and stuff, but also, Bryan, don't you think, and this is pure hypothesis, don't you think that they're probably thinking that while there's still room for growth, they can maybe see the ceiling for Ultimate Team digital revenue as well, and that this esports really needs to be the start of another new revenue stream? Does that resonate with you in any way? Because that just sort of, thinking about the other way, like other day, like they're making big money on DLC with Ultimate Team, but there's only so much you can make by doing that, right?
Yeah, and I think I brought this up before, is that there is a ceiling potentially for Ultimate Team. We still see it growing and growing, and we see them bringing in new features, but eventually these people who spend hundreds and $1,000s every year in this mode, in these various games, are going to say, I've already done all this. I've already done all this. I've already invested so much money, and you're asking me to start over again from scratch every year. And so we're looking at, I always thought it's natural. Ultimate Team goes off onto its own, kind of in a free-to-play setup. And then in order to do that, though, EA or whatever publisher has to come up with another way to generate revenue to compensate for the downward trend in sales and just the increase in development costs that have been happening in recent years. So I do think absolutely this is another avenue of revenue for them potentially that will allow them to continue to develop these games. And I got questions from people after this news came out, which I thought was pretty interesting, where their minds kind of went on this, which was, does this mean does this give them more reason to bring back like MVP baseball because of esports? Right. No. But this is what people are thinking is,
right.
Well, they need games for esports, right? They need
They
games.
Have plenty of games. They have plenty. EA has a great portfolio, a great number of titles in their portfolio. It doesn't just have to be the sports games. Like Battlefield is built for this kind of thing as well, so now granted, obviously more is better. The more products you have to sell, the more revenue you potentially can make. But
and baseball is not suited for esports, but also, is this why NBA Live continues to stick around? Because they're looking down the line, and we've been mainly, I think, justifiably concentrating on Ultimate Team as far as why does a game that doesn't sell exist, essentially? Right. And it's because they think in a few years they can start selling, and in a few years people will start spending digital revenue in the games. And this gives them another excuse to have these games, another path they can go down to try and justify their existence or get better returns on them in the future. So I do think esports in that way, it does factor in, and I do think they're looking at a future where just selling a game for $60 doesn't work anymore. They need either digital revenue or esports revenue or both to really survive.
My cat's looking for Rocky, by the way, just so you know.
Rocky is on the chair, just out of frame. He's sleeping comfortably and listening to us as always.
So the other thing that I got to thinking about is, building out esports modes, building out esports infrastructure takes resources. It takes design. It takes testing. It takes all of those things. How much of the influence of esports modes will impact others as well? I mean, for years, we have had people say or be concerned about their fears that Ultimate Team will take focus away from and potentially, valuable resources, time and money away from traditional modes, franchise and online leagues and things like that. So now if you're building these modes just for esports, again, it doesn't necessarily have to, it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, right? Like you might add 10 more people to your team to do esports stuff that doesn't impact all the other things. However, at the end of the day, every title has a finite dollar amount of budget, and every title has to have certain things that they do and they don't do every year. So that's another thing I got thinking of. As esports becomes officially part of each one of these games, what does that potentially mean for the modes that we have played for so long? And again, I'm not even saying it's a bad thing, right? There's only so many things you can do with a franchise mode, right? There's only so many things you can do with a single player career mode without like completely just going, crazy and doing things wildly differently. So again, I'm not necessarily sounding the alarm bell, but these are other things that people will definitely, consider and think about as these modes are introduced and expanded.
I think I understand the concern, but at the same time, just as with Ultimate Team, they need the games to sell first and foremost. They need the games to be popular. You can see Rocky's tail wagging there just a little bit in the chair.
He's happy to see Rocky.
This is him dreaming. He's actually dreaming.
Oh, okay.
Having a good dream. So they have to. The game has to remain popular for it to be relevant, right? You can't put NBA Live into esports and think you're going to make money and it's going to be super popular. And it's going to spread and everybody's going to pay attention. It doesn't work like that, right? You have to have a game that's also already massively popular or intriguing, interesting to watch for various reasons, interesting strategy, balanced. It has to be all of these things that factor into making it a good esports game. And you can't do that without paying attention to the rest of the product. It's just like Ultimate Team. If there aren't people there to buy the regular game, they're not going to make money on Ultimate Team because no one's going to buy it. No one's there to play it and spend money in it. So I can definitely understand why someone might be concerned that resources were being directed, greater resources being directed towards these different types of modes that they have a different mindset for than the typical modes and gameplay and presentation and stuff. But that doesn't worry me, because they still have, it still comes down to the product being good and being popular and selling, and the only way they do that is by making it a good, complete game.
And the last thing that I wanted to think about the implications are, and I don't think we'll see this in 2016, but the world's most popular esports games are free. They're free to play.
Yeah.
So how long does EA couple all of these things together? Or do they, using the licenses that they have and the core engines that they have, do they eventually extricate the esports modes, from it, so that, people who, because an esports game is a very different thing than a regular game. Like an esports version of Madden is different than a regular version of Madden, because the teams need to be evenly balanced, right? And it has to have a very different, level playing field. So, at how long, because the business model is so successful for free to play, how long are they, in the same? Because, the Madden team, the FIFA team could take the esports mode and make it free to play, and then have the same business model that the Riots and the Dotas have, where, players customize their teams and customize their stadiums, or they add various features that may not give them a advantage on the field, but may give them that distinction. And as we've seen with the League of Legends and the Dotas, that people that really enjoy the game will spend money just to personalize it, to their likes. So that's another thing that's weighing on here. And I don't know, EA may have a roadmap already, where they're like, okay, in year 1, we're going to set up the infrastructure for the tournaments. Year 2, the tournament's going to get bigger. Year 3, we're going to take this mode and go free to play. In year 4, or they may not. It'll be very interesting to see again in the near future, not necessarily this fall's games, but certainly next 2 to 3 years, whether the esports versions of any or all of these sports games are taken away from the main game and made their own, their own free to play or cheap to play model.
Yeah, free to start, free to play. I think that's still a ways away, because they still have these commitments to investors, commitments to licenses, where they don't want to cannibalize sales yet. We do have kind of a free to play already with Pro Evolution Soccer,
which is going to be fascinating to see how that does.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Which offers its Ultimate Team type mode for free. We also have some kind of free to play with EA Access, with these games going in 6 months after they come out or whatever. When they're still relevant, you can get in there and play it as part of your subscription and spend money.
And 10 hours playing it before it comes out as well. That's a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, so those are all interesting things to monitor, and how they expand that. I think we're on that going that general direction with those. But the question is whether they can do that, where they're comfortable enough with everything to say, okay, we're going to give this thing away for free, because we know our main titles are still going to sell. Would people not buy Madden if they could play Ultimate Team and Draft Champions for free? That type of thing. And they probably see much lower sales. So can they offset that with the digital revenue and the esports revenue and whatever else they can do with those? And would the league approve of that? Those are all questions that really are beyond us at this point. But I definitely think in the future that it's going to be a different model. It's just a question of what that model is. And I'm not sure if they even have a full grasp on that yet either.
And the esports fans are not necessarily sports fans. When I look at the analytics of the different content that I put out in different places, the traditional sports game fans don't exactly flock to stories and podcasts about esports the way that they do about new Madden features or new NBA 2K features.
And they don't watch. They don't even watch really at the numbers. Don't even watch what you think like sports games would be perfectly suited for viewership. And they're you'll get a few hundred people watching, a few thousand people watching a sports heavily publicized sports game stream. But that pales in comparison to hundreds of thousands, millions watching some of those others.